All right, Bang Bang. Today is Tuesday, November 19th, Chicago Dog Walk. Obviously, we are back for some tinfoil. Chief, how are you?
I'm doing great, Ed. Happy Tuesday.
Yeah, happy Tuesday. But before we get into our topic today, you know what, let's talk about the topic a little bit first before we get into our ad read. We're talking about Jimmy Hoffa.
It's a big topic.
Huge topic.
You love this topic.
This is a great topic.
Yeah.
I mean, how could I not love it?
I mean, you saw The Irishman.
Yes, I saw The Irishman, so I'll get into a little bit of a tease there, but like I said, let's talk about Yamaha for a second here. So we're always in this situation where we have conference calls here at Barstool Chicago, and it's like, oh, whose phone are we going to use? You know, and it's like becomes a thing. It's like, who's going to bust out their phone for the GPS? Who's going to be the guy who calls the person when you're out front of someone's house?
Yep.
And everyone's kind of like, you know, you got little alligator arms. You don't really want to, you know, whatever. Like, let someone else do it.
You don't want that. You don't want someone else holding your phone when text messages are coming in. It's like everyone's very protective of their phone. Yamaha kind of solves that problem for us here.
They do, because we got this little speakerphone. It's just like yay big. You know, it's very portable. Very, you know, we can take it wherever you want on the go. Yeah. And that's what we always use. It's Bluetooth accessible. It's a very nice piece of equipment.
It's smaller than a Frisbee.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
It's smaller than a Frisbee. It's like almost little, you know.
You can palm it.
Yeah, you can palm it for sure. So check out all their products at uc.yamaha.com/barstool. Right now, they're offering 10% off their YVC 200 portable speakerphone that connects to your phone or laptop and gives you the ability to take your office wherever you go. Head over to uc.yamaha.com/barstool to get a personal speakerphone, for yourself or with the upcoming holidays. Grab one for those on the go or remote workers in your life. They're honestly awesome.
They are really great. Yeah, they help us out a lot here. You should, anyone in the office, if you have an office environment, you're going to want to have it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jimmy Hoffa. So, I saw The Irishman, as you said earlier, and I knew Al Pacino's character was Jimmy Hoffa. I didn't know how big this guy was before I saw this movie.
Yeah, I didn't really know either. I obviously heard the name. I know about, you know, how he was assassinated or went missing, and there's all kinds of like rumors and theories. He's under, you know, the Meadowlands, all kinds of like weird stories. I just thought he was like a mafia boss.
Yeah.
That's always what I thought. I thought he was just like another, you know, pick a name, Trafficante, like one of these guys who was just a mafia boss and nothing else. But that's very, very wrong.
Yeah, and I just know him as kind of the union guy. Oh, that's the guy who was big in the unions. He had some mafia ties. Whatever. You know, never really thought too much into it. He wasn't like a Al Capone.
Right.
He wasn't like another, you know, mythical mob character that you really dug deep on.
Right.
Turns out you should, because this guy was a fucking real, like, he was a big deal back in these days.
So big that the president of the United States on multiple occasions were speaking his name to a national TV audience.
Insane.
It's insane.
Insane. So, yeah, let's just kind of start from the beginning. Let's start with our upbringing. What we think we're going to do now, we'll see how the show kind of plays out here. But we think today we're going to get into a little bit of his upbringing and how, you know, the Teamsters kind of came to be. And then tomorrow we're going to get into, like, the whole disappearance and everything like that.
I think that sounds like a great plan.
Yeah. So
get everybody prepped for The Irishman, which comes out the day before Thanksgiving, correct?
Yes, comes out the day before Thanksgiving on Netflix. Yeah. I saw it in theaters. It's only in 2 theaters in Chicago. Awesome movie. If you love those Goodfellas and those casinos, it's right up there with those. It was awesome to see the guys back for one more round, I guess.
You gave it 9.2. An A+, and how many gold stars?
A lot of gold stars, as many as I can give. It really is a great movie. So, so let's just get into Jimmy Hoffa's upbringing. And we're going to try. It's kind of weird too, because we're going to try to avoid spoilers here. Yeah, which we're not going to. There's really, like you said earlier, how can you spoil history? Right. Yeah, and really this one will be kind of spoiler free, because the disappearance is where there's contradicting arguments. Right. So this is really just some background.
Well, it's like, you know, if you saw Lincoln, you know he gets shot in the end. Yeah. Okay, you can't spoil that. Yeah. So sure. same situation here, kind of. So I mean, might as well start at the very beginning. He's from a place called Brazil, Indiana. He was born to, like, you know, immigrant parents from, like, they're German and Irish, and his father was a coal miner. Okay, so think back then. This is like early 1900s. You're in the coal, you're going down into the mines, you're breathing that black dust, and it's miserable working conditions. So from an early age, Jimmy Hoffa was like conditioned to seeing like the plight of the working man. And his father actually died from like black lung. Like he got lung disease from working in the coal mine and died when Jimmy Hoffa was only 7 years old.
Really, yeah. And if he grew up, like he had that job, but he did grow up kind of poor. Is that right?
Yeah, you're right. So his family then like relocated his mother and his siblings moved to Detroit because Detroit was starting to boom with the auto industry. They're just looking for any opportunity. They had some family there. And they're very poor family growing up in Detroit to the point that he dropped out of school at age 15 to work on the docks, like to work in a warehouse of a food company called Kroger Foods.
And oddly enough, they moved to Detroit to start a better life. And then in the 30s, something happened.
Great Depression hits. So as you can imagine, it's tough working conditions for anybody. Employment situation's tough. Jimmy Hoffa has a job, but it's not a good job, okay? So you've seen the movie Cinderella Man?
Yes, great movie.
Awesome movie. That scene where...
One of my favorites.
Me too, actually, yeah. So where they have this mass of people show up at the docks every day just looking for any type of work to unload trucks or boats or whatever, and they just kind of pick people out of the crowd and like, you guys get to work today, the rest of you guys are going hungry. So that was like the situation where anytime there's a job posting or a chance for employment by this Kroger Foods where Jimmy Hoffa worked, hundreds of people would show up for one job. So they had, no real strength to complain or do anything like that. But as time went on, Jimmy Hoffa had just kind of gotten fed up. So they would show up for work and they'd be there all day, but they would only get paid for the amount of time it actually took them to unload the trucks. So it's like you're there for 9-10 hours waiting for trucks to come through, and maybe you only do 2 hours of work, but your day is spent and you're not making that much money. So that, along with like horrible working conditions, when he's 19, he organizes a walkout the factory.
And now, was he full time at Kroger though?
He was full time. Yeah.
So he was one of the lucky ones that actually had a set job. He wasn't one of the hundreds trying to barge to the door for one spot.
Right.
But anyways, he wasn't
getting full-time hours.
Yes.
So he's there full-time, but he's not paid like a full-time employee.
Mm-hmm. So crazy how that works out, because that would never fly in today's day and age.
Right, exactly. You are paid for your time.
Yes.
So he's organizing this walkout with the rest of the people who are quote-unquote full-time, and because there's all these people looking for work, they kind of have to go a step further, and they barricade the warehouse. So no one gets in. Everybody, like, he forms like an impromptu union almost, because they didn't have a union at that time. So there's no, like, they call them scabs. There's no scabs getting in there, and he blocks it out, and the food starts to rot on the trucks, and, Kroger's losing out money coming and going because no one was able to buy it. They also have to pay for what was shipped. So they actually win. So Jimmy Hoffa and negotiates a 1-year deal with Kroger, and people are generally happy, and that was like his first big union organizing victory.
Yeah, and it just kind of stacked from there, how he became this monster person who just kind of made the Teamsters union and just was an all-around union guy, like the union founder almost.
Exactly. So like he a couple years later, they didn't have a chance the Kroger wouldn't renegotiate. So then after that year was up, so he's like, well, we're fucked now. So what do? He went and partnered with the Teamsters. So that's really how he got into the Teamsters. Like, he had his own union of dock workers, and he's like, we need more influence. So I'm going to partner with these guys who are the truck drivers. They were a much bigger union. And then that allowed them to kind of get back in and renegotiate. So the truck drivers and the dock workers partnered together to get better collective bargaining, and that worked too, until Jimmy Hoffa again got fed up, and he dumped a bucket of juice and pulp over a foreman and got fired. And then from that point on, he was just, like you said, a labor union organizer.
So how did he become? Should we jump into how he became the president of the Teamsters, or do we kind of go into how he kind of got involved with some shady people to make all this happen?
Well, I mean, we can kind of still start in the 30s. Like, his rise is kind of wild, where now it's like he's in the Teamsters Union, he's an organizer, and at this point, they only have 100,000 members, okay? Jimmy Hoffa starts being like a bad mamma jamma. So he would go to all these different car hauling and trucking companies and being like, you guys better enroll your employees, and even if you are an employee and you don't want to be an employee, fuck you, you're you're in the union, okay? So he was strong arming people, and they would show up with chains and baseball bats and basically being like, you better join the union. And people would be like, okay, yes, sir, Mr. Hoffa. Or they would say like, no, fuck you. And then what do you know? Their trucks would get bombed. Okay. Yeah. So like that was like his style. Like he was like a real strong arm guy, take no prisoners. But the flip side of it is, as like whether the people were coerced into joining this union or not, the IBT, once they got in, they're like, oh my God, this is actually pretty great. So Jimmy Hoffa would get him like more money, like better benefits, like do all the things. So like he might have had to like blow a few things up to get people to join. But once they were in, they're like, hey, like I kind of like this guy.
Unbelievable. I mean, car bombings, having these people with imagine that. Like the CTU, like they're standing out there with their lines, and all these teachers are just fighting people.
Yeah, like, just getting bashing people over the head. Yeah,
they're starting car bombs. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like freaking Lori Lightfoot's. You know, her wife, like just that'd be crazy.
It would
crazy
be insane.
Times.
Yeah. So and he just like. And so he became like notorious because it was like, oh, like, it's Jimmy Hoffa. Like everybody in Detroit knew his name because he's like, oh, that's the guy who will blow up your truck. So if you don't join the union. But he took the membership from under 100,000 when he started to by the end of the 30s, it was over 500,000. So he was like, what do you know? The best recruiter. Blowing up cars, blowing up trucks, very, very good recruiting method.
Yeah, but he got the backing to strong arm people. It's, it works out.
Right.
Does it work out for you?
Right. So then in the 40s, now the war is starting, World War II starting, and the union is like so massive that they're able to get all these government contracts because the military is shipping shit all over the country to different ports and putting, they're making Jeeps or putting them on boats. Those have to be transported. They call the IBT. Now the IBT is rolling. So that's the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. I don't know if we said that's what IBT stands for. That's who Jimmy Hoffa was organizing for and working with. So they're like, it became like one of the most powerful unions in the whole country, really from his leadership.
Yeah. So then kind of a stroke of, I don't want to say good luck because it was because of a war, but you get what I'm getting at, where it was great timing to be Jimmy Hoffa when, things need to be transported for the war.
I mean, he took advantage of an opportunity and did a great job.
So now where does the mob come to play? Because they kind of he needed them at one point to kind of start strong-arming more people, right?
Right. So that was in like the 50s, okay? So now he's become like, again, like almost like a Robin Hood figure. So he's like a criminal. Like people know he's a criminal, okay? Like the government knows he's a criminal. Everybody knows he's a criminal. But
he's a criminal who's working for the people.
For his people.
Yes.
So his people love him. Okay. Love him, okay? But now he's risen to being the national vice president of the IBT. So now they have over 1 million members nationwide, and like I said, their influence is growing, but it's such a big network that he needed the Mafia to kind of be his, he would outsource the muscle. So he used to be there clubbing people and setting car bombs and things like that. Now he kind of outsourced that role to the Mafia. So, and in exchange, he would appoint Mafia members into these, leadership roles at local chapters of the IBT.
And even more so, which is the most fascinating part about this is, and, stop me if you want to get to something before this, but the pension fund of the Teamsters was funding the casinos in Las Vegas. So the mobsters had great gain out of Jimmy Hoffa as well.
They did have great gain, right? Yeah. So it was the Vegas casinos, it was country clubs in Florida and Louisiana, hotels, even hospitals and restaurants. So again, if you like go back and watch The Godfather, you always see like Michael Corleone is saying like, we're going to be completely legitimate in like 10 years. Like that's our goal. We want to take the family legitimate. We have all these businesses. Well, if you want to, invest in a casino or a hospital or something, to kind of wash your money and be legitimate, you're not going down to fucking Chase, okay? Like you don't have access to the cash needed for a major, huge construction project like that and to buy the licenses and all that. So if you can't go down to the bank to get like a normal business loan, you go over to see Jimmy Hoffa, and he'll give you the money from the IBT pension fund. But same thing, it was a booming success for the IBT pension fund because the Mafia did pay those loans back with interest. So they're making more money off of their dealings with the mafia through that pension fund than they ever would have just putting it into like a mutual fund or some, a Roth IRA or whatever else they could invest in. They're making the IBT pension fund was a booming. So nobody cared. Nobody cared that he was dealing with the mafia because Jimmy Hoffa was making things work well for his union members.
And this wasn't like a best kept secret, right? Like people kind of knew this was happening.
Everybody knew. Yeah, everybody knew that he had ties with the mafia going back a long way, and it really ramped up in the 50s.
And then a very powerful family takes action against this, right?
Right. So now we're into the 50s, and not only is Hoffa like his mafia ties are known, it's also like highly suspected that he's getting kickbacks, which he was off of these loan. Like he would give loans to the mafia, then they would, invest some of it, and then some of the money that would just go right directly back into his pocket. So he was like doing shady things, but the IBT was always coming out ahead. So everybody kind of looked the other way.
Yeah. Makes sense. I mean, the guy who kind of orchestrates it all, like if you're happy, you're gonna let them be a little more happier, I guess.
Exactly. So now it's like the Kennedys, and this is in the 50s still. So you had JFK was a sitting senator from Massachusetts, and Bobby Kennedy was he was like a lawyer, a prosecutor for the government as well. So they start to bring, in 1957, they bring all these charges against the president of the IBT, which this guy, the last name was Beck, and Jimmy Hoffa. So they're both up there. They're both being questioned. Beck used the Fifth Amendment like 65 times in an hour during questioning. It was on live TV. They had the whole hearing on live TV, and he used the Fifth Amendment, which I think everyone knows what that is. You don't have to incriminate yourself. But it's like, yeah, I'm guilty, but I just won't say it. It's generally how that's viewed. And Hoffa was like a little bit more forthcoming than that, but he knew that like they couldn't pin anything on him. So eventually they try to like basically set up a sting to get Hoffa. And they have like some other like kind of rat guy acting like he was a mole for like in the Kennedy camp, and they like set up cameras to record Hoffa like giving this guy money and Hoffa was leaking them information about Beck so he could just rise to be the president of the IBT. And so they caught him on that. They put him on trial. They were about to convict him. Okay, they had him every which way. The Kennedys like in their crosshairs. And his lawyer brings in Joe Louis, who is the heavyweight champion.
Yep, so, Detroit man.
What? Detroit guy. Yeah. Very prominent African-American in culture at that time. Like think, LeBron James, Michael Jordan, like Muhammad Ali. And he was at that level of fame and influence. So he came to the courthouse and shook hands with Jimmy Hoffa and like wished him luck as like a staged thing. Like Joe Louis like barely knew who he was, but that like swayed the jury because it was like, oh, like Joe Louis is a working man. This is about workers' rights, civil rights. They kind of like conflated the issues. The champ,
yeah.
And it got him off. So he wasn't convicted, and poof, he's the president of the IBT.
Unbelievable. So, but his troubles with the Kennedys don't stop there, though, because it kind of became like a all-out war between...
Oh, it was a blood feud.
Yeah.
They fucking hated Hoffa. Hoffa hated them. It was like a whole thing, and it was made even worse when Kennedy gets elected in 1960 and appoints Bobby as Attorney General. So now Bobby, who was going after him before, has all the resources of the federal government, and he's got a green light from his brother to just go after, not only after the Mafia, but also after Jimmy Hoffa, who they kind of see as one and the same. And that's kind of where it breaks down, is that Jimmy Hoffa is a Robin Hood type figure, and RFK thinks of himself as like this bleeding heart liberal who's out for the working man, and Jimmy Hoffa is taking advantage of the working man. So it's like, no, I'm for the working man. No, he's like, no, I'm actually for the working man. And they like kind of actually hate each other. But it was all like the Kennedys were trying to like solidify their base and like put him in a corner as he's not really for you, we're for you.
Yeah, and it was white collar versus blue collar.
That too.
Yeah.
So and it was like the Kennedys went to prep school, they went to Harvard, like they're from Joe Kennedy's from a ton of money. But they had some similar friends, meaning the Mafia. Yeah. So like Kennedy was at one, Bobby Kennedy was going after the Mafia on one hand. JFK is using them to help him get elected. It's always like the famous Chicago stories where they had every corpse voting for Kennedy, and they were strong-arming people into like closing polls early and things like that. It was all mafia stuff.
Yeah.
So because of that, the mafia hated the Kennedys because they thought they were going to have like a runway after they helped him get elected. And Hoffa hated the Kennedys because they would not stop going after him. So now it's like, what do we do about this fucking guy?
I'm thinking of that meme right now where it's like the two people shaking hands, and then in the middle it's like the mafia and the mafia,
like the strong
hating the Kennedys in the middle. Yeah, the strong man.
Yeah,
that's
exactly what it was. So they had mutual interest. So I think last week we talked about the CIA possibly being involved in the Kennedy assassination. There's a lot of fingers that get pointed to the mafia for organizing a hit on JFK.
Because at one point they figured that if they killed Bobby Kennedy, it would be easily linked to them.
Exactly.
So they were like, hey, if we take out the top guy, we'll take out John. He's the fucking president.
Right.
And Bobby loses kind of everything. And then we take care of our problem as almost a domino effect, right?
Right. Because you said it perfectly. Like they would know. Be like, who would kill Bobby Kennedy? The people that have vested interest in getting rid of this fucking guy. And they would be scooped up on that almost instantly. You kill the president, and it's like, did Cuba do it? Did the Russians do it? Did the CIA? It's like all the things we talk about all the time of who killed Kennedy. Nobody really knows, but it was like a mutual interest between Hoffa and two particular mob bosses. So it was Santo Trafficante, who is like the head of the mafia in Florida, and then Carlos Marcello, who was the head of the mafia in New Orleans. Like those were, and if you remember, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie JFK or followed this, all of those operations for like Operation Mongoose and all the things that we talked about with the CIA and the mafia were basically out of those two places. So you had the Cuban exiles in Miami, and then you had Lee Harvey Oswald and head of the Naval Intelligence, and all those people were stationed in New Orleans. So there's a lot of like dots being connected. Marcello also, he had a relationship with Lee Harvey Oswald. He also had a relationship with Jack Ruby, who had all kinds of mob ties, who killed Oswald to like keep Oswald from running his mouth.
I mean, it's unbelievable. Like, who the fuck knows what happened? But the fact that the mafia and the fucking Teamster union president and Fidel Castro and the Kennedys run so closely together, it's just honestly... like America was a movie in those days.
It was unbelievable, and it's like now like all these like key actors in this thing are now dead, but there's reports that different mobsters would be like, oh yeah, Carlos fucked up. Like he said it in a book. Carlos fucked up. We really should have just killed. He said we shouldn't have killed Giovanni, meaning John. We should have killed Bobby.
Yeah.
Like that. That we fucked up on that because John like he was known for like dealing with their prostitutes. Like they had him every which way. Yeah. And that was another thing. Those mob bosses had a lot of dirt on J. Edgar Hoover. So now this is back in the 1960s. J. Edgar Hoover was the head of the FBI. Big time. He's a homosexual and like into homosexual prostitution.
Oh.
And the mafia knew that. They had pictures, they had recordings, and this is like that your whole career's over back then.
Yeah.
So
I mean, obviously it wasn't as widely accepted then.
Exactly. So. Right. So if you find out that this guy is, he's gay in 1963.
Yeah, it's a lot different.
Right. So it's like, hey, like maybe I won't go after these people so hard because then my life, they can extort him and just hold this information that they have about him over his head forever. So the FBI never really investigated the mafia on any level, Kennedy or some of their other dealings.
It's crazy. So should we get to anything else before we wrap up this part one? And obviously where we're getting tomorrow is when he kind of flew too close to the sun.
Right.
And but I don't know if there's anything that's kind of put a ribbon on this, put a bow on this.
Well, I would say that, Hoffa was eventually arrested. So he was arrested for jury tampering, I think, and convicted in 1964. So all the other things, he's been tied to murders and racketeering and, corruption, all these things. The only thing they ever got him on was jury tampering, and they sent him to jail. I think he had a 13-year sentence. So a year after Kennedy was assassinated, Hoffa, within the next calendar year, was convicted.
So it didn't even help him out like he thought he would. Like there were still people after him after he killed that allegedly put a hit out for Kennedy.
Yeah. So I mean, he didn't do like the hard time, but yeah, he still ended up going to jail.
Okay, so he goes to jail, and then that's where kind of the next.
Yeah. Well, we can pick it up from there tomorrow.
When the gears switch to the second part of the story where he seemingly disappears out of nowhere, vanishes, and
gets out of jail. We'll talk about it tomorrow.
And pretty much nobody knows what happened. So, yeah, that's part one. Talking Jimmy Hoffa. A lot of this is in the movie. So, and I swear this isn't an ad for the movie, but
I can't wait.
Yeah, it's awesome.
3.5 hours, well worth your time.
3.5 hours, yes.
Okay,
well worth it.
Okay,
I'll watch those guys for 8 hours.
Okay.
So yeah, so that's it for today, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow. Hopefully, maybe we're trying to reach out to like an expert on this topic too. To join us. But if not, it'll be Chief and us. We're going to research as much as we can. And yeah, that's part one here, talking about the background of Jimmy Hoffa.